This week on Israel Update.
As you shout, know that God is giving you victory. As you shout, know that the enemies are fleeing. As you shout, know that God is vanquishing the walls that have held you back.
And here in Israel, even though the government and Benjamin Netanyahu wants to help the people, but they cannot do anything. They cannot do anything now because of the fact that we don't have a functioning government and they cannot defreeze the money.
Hello to you. Thank you so much for tuning in and welcome to Israel Update. We are totally focused on everything to do with Israel here. We are the Israel Ministry branch of the House of Destiny, and I'm very, very thankful to be able to have the opportunity to speak to you, to share with you, and I'm really just asking and trusting God that He's going to do something in your heart today as we speak. So throughout the year, we've been looking at God being the one who has won all the battles. The battle belongs to the Lord. It does. It's simple. It's clear. He is the winner. God is the winner. That is the good news. However, through life, we all face battles. All of us are facing something, and if we haven't faced something, we will face something. It's just part of what we go through. I know that you know this. You have probably faced far more battles than I have, and so part of life is learning to navigate those battles. Part of life is learning to find God in these moments and to also see what God is teaching us. And so as we look at the nation of Israel, and as we look at God's interaction with the nation of Israel, as we look at what He's done for them, through them, on their behalf for millennia, thousands of years. When we read through the scriptures, when we read through the Old Testament, we really are reading this account showing who God is with His interaction with His people, the chosen people, the Jewish nation. And so as we look at this, as we read it, as we study it, there's so much that we can glean from it for our own lives in today. God is the same. The book of Hebrews tells us that. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so the things that He did for Israel thousands of years ago, He's still fighting on Israel's behalf today, which is a miracle. And we've spoken about it many times on the show, the miracle that is the nation of Israel, to see where they came from, the rebirth again in 1948, the fulfillment of prophecy, the fact that the desert is literally blooming like the prophet Isaiah foresaw hundreds of years before Jesus was even born. There are so many things that have happened, and we focus in and zoom, like really just zoom in on Israel, knowing that God's eye is upon her. He placed her at the center of the nations for a reason, and that our responsibility as Christian people is to love her, to bless her, to support her, to pray for her. So now that I have given you that entire little disclaimer, we're going to continue looking at battle posture. And we've been looking at battle posture. You know, you kind of think about facing a battle, I don't know, like old school, like would be with a sword, and nowadays probably with a gun or whatever. But battle posture in our hearts obviously looks very different. And so the battle posture that I want to look at today is the battle posture of shouting. The one that I did last was the battle posture of staying silent, also taken out of Joshua chapter 6. And we're looking at the Battle of Jericho. This was the first battle that the people of Israel faced after their years of captivity and slavery in Egypt, after being led through the wilderness for those 40 years by Moses. And then this is now the leadership mantle has changed. It's passed on to Joshua. The weight of responsibility for God's people, His nation, is upon Joshua, and God is now leading His people into the promised land with Joshua as the guy that's going to lead them there. So last time we looked at how Joshua had said to the people, don't talk. When we're marching around these walls, don't talk. Not a word is to come out of any of your mouths. And we spoke about how sometimes one of the battle postures we have to learn is keeping quiet, which is a very difficult one. But the one that I want to look at today is the battle posture of shouting. Now, this is sometimes a difficult one to do in church. I don't know why in church people kind of feel the need to be super reserved and quiet, because you'll see these guys that like paint themselves blue and go to a sports game. And I'm like, wow, you dressed up like a hot dog to go and support that sports team, and you screamed so much you lost your voice. But then in church, it's like, if anybody dares say like maybe you should clap a little bit, people get like offended. But I mean, you're here, which means you don't feel that way, because we all know how raucous and loud it got with Kim. But looking at the city of Jericho, these walls were very intense for anybody who was coming to even consider trying to attack the city. They were so big that chariot races would be held atop of them. They would literally race chariots on top of the walls. That's how massive the walls were. And so this is the city that they get brought to first. And the strategy is one that God gives Joshua. You're going to march around it 7 times. You're going to give a shout. And then I'm going to give you the city. And so this is what I'm looking at now in the book of Joshua chapter 6. I don't have time to read all of it, but when we see it, we read through how each day they rose at dawn and marched around the city, and then on the 7th day they marched around it 7 times. And then it says in verse 16, and the 7th time it happened when the priests blew the trumpets, that Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And we go down and we drop down to verse 20. It says, so the people shouted when the priests blew the trumpets. And it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout that the wall fell down. Then the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city. Now we read that in a couple of verses, and we sing songs when we're in Sunday school, and I'm sure if you were in like Sunday school at some point, you would have like done the Joshua march. If you were like born in the 80s like I was, where you get marched around and like, the walls. But this is actually supernatural and incredible what happened. God gave a directive, he gave an instruction. First was to remain silent and to march. Then at a specific point, when the priests were instructed by Joshua to blow the trumpets, which would have been the sound of shofars, blowing, going out, when that sound was released, Joshua said to the people, shout now. When you hear the sound of these trumpets, you need to shout. And that is when God is going to give you the city. And so imagine it, these walls that are so massive that they're racing chariots on top of them. These walls that are impenetrable, that are terrifying for any city, any nation coming to try and think about taking Jericho on. This group of unprepared Israelites who were not battle ready, were not soldiers, their priests are the ones who led the way with the singers. They are the ones who went out in front, and they are the ones who led the people in this march. And I kind of try and always imagine what it would have been like to be there. As this shout, this roar went out, the ground would have begun to shake, and these walls, if you think about it, if the walls had fallen in ways, everybody inside would have been killed that way. But it tells us that the people of Israel ran in and destroyed everybody in the city. And if they'd fallen outwards, it would have crushed the people marching around the city. So what must have happened is that as the walls were shaking, it just went down into the ground. And these giant walls that had kept so many people out, that seemed completely indestructible, fell because a group of people that had been slaves in Egypt for 430 years shouted. There's something here for us to learn, and that is that God does not operate the way that we do, that his ways are not our ways, his thoughts are not our thoughts, and that he is not limited or confined the way we are. And so I don't know what you're facing. Israel was facing a physical city with physical walls that were massive. And God gave the directive, and as they shouted, these walls came down supernaturally. They ran and took the city, and that was the beginning of the conquest that Joshua led for the people of Israel to begin to claim the promised land that God had designated to be their eternal covenant inheritance. And the land that Israel is living in today is that same land that God gave, that he decreed. When he created the earth, that is the part of earth that he chose and selected as his own. But Israel was facing a physical city with a physical enemy. I don't know what your Jericho is. I don't know what walls you're facing. I do know what it is to be intimidated by loss, by fear, by darkness. In a personal capacity, I understand that. And I don't know what your Jericho is, but God does. I don't know what the walls are that you're facing, but God does. And what I do know about God is that he doesn't have to use formulas. He's God. He's bigger than all of that. And so maybe what I'm encouraging some of you to do is to just go get in your car or go somewhere and just shout. And I'm not talking like her, I'm talking like roar, like shout. I would do that now, but the microphone will feed back and then the sound guys will get mad at me. But just know, I'm talking like shout. Maybe you just need to shout and as you shout, know that God is giving you victory. As you shout, know that the enemies are fleeing. As you shout, know that God is vanquishing the walls that have held you back. So I encourage you to do it. That was like a gentle little shout. I covered the microphone and yelled out there. But wherever you are, do it. Somebody might think you're crazy, that's fine. If it was at a sports game, they'd have no problem with it. So if you need to go get in your car, put your face in a pillow, or do what you have to do, shout and know that God is able to see the walls that face you come crumbling down. Know that He is the same, and that what He did for the people of Israel, He can and will do for you. Because He's personal, He cares about you, He knows who you are, and even if it feels like nobody else does, He does and He cares. So my encouragement to you is whatever Jericho you might be facing, whatever it might look like, whatever name that wall has for you, as you shout unto God with a voice of triumph, know that He is coming and that the walls you see will come down. Heaven is going to be a noisy place. It speaks about how God has ascended and descended amidst shouts and trumpets. And when we read in the book of Revelation, it speaks about how there's going to be peoples from nations and all over the earth. And there's going to be it's going to be noisy. I'm excited. Music and craziness. It's going to be awesome. This host of people, angels and people, everybody singing, shouting unto God. But there's different seasons for all of us and different postures we have to adopt. But my encouragement to you is if you're facing something that feels like Jericho, like the Israelites did, shout unto God with a voice of triumph and watch those walls come down. Father, I just pray that every person who's watching, whatever it is that they're facing, I pray that you would fill them with faith, with hope, with strength, and that they would know that as they do it in faith, it might seem so dumb, it might seem silly, but it's what you told the Israelites to do, and as they shouted, walls came down. And I know walls are still coming down today. They may not be physical, but they certainly are spiritual. And so I pray for faith and life to be infused in every person watching, and that as they shout unto you with a voice of triumph, they would see those walls come down. And I thank you that you are good and that you are working on behalf of every person. And I thank you for your goodness to us in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for watching. Make sure you tune in next week. Every Friday, we have a new show for you only on israelupdate.org. Have an amazing week. And if you'd like to, email me in and tell me your stories of what you shouted at and what God did for you. I'm standing in faith with you, agreeing for that. So you can email me on israelupdate at houseofdestiny.org. That comes directly to me. And I really would. I'm anticipating hearing the testimonies of what God's done in your life as you stand in that battle posture of shouting. God bless you.
Israel Update is brought to you by the generous supporters of the Israel Partnership. Because of their love for Israel, we are able to bring you this show and continue to sow into the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. For more information on how to become a sustaining partner, please click the Israel Partner banner below.
I'm bringing you today a quicker report. I was planning to literally go to the Israeli parliament, to the Knesset, because we were supposed to have the inauguration of the new government yesterday. Then they postponed it to today, and I was thinking that this would be the day that I'll go there and we would finally have a functioning government here in Israel. But you know, we are dealing with a huge enemy. This adversary is really targeting the government of Israel. After 3 elections, a year and a half, and we still don't have the inauguration today. They have postponed it now to next week. And I just want you to stay together with us in prayer and make sure that this will end already, because we are in the midst of this coronavirus crisis. People need to be compensated for the situation that they don't have work, they lost their jobs. There's 26.5% of the Israelis are unemployed right now. And since we don't have a functioning government, we cannot give any money from the budget to try and help the people. I know back in America, for example, they defrosted money and budgets and they gave it to the people that were stuck at home. In England, in Sweden, so many countries around the world are able to support their citizens and help them go through these very tough times with some kind of a compensation money, some kind of a budget, to even enable them to go to the grocery store and buy something. And here in Israel, even though the government and Benjamin Netanyahu wants to help the people, but they cannot do anything. They cannot do anything now because of the fact that we don't have a functioning government and they cannot defreeze the money. So please, it's about time now to end all this. We already have a coalition. We already know how many members of Knesset would be in the coalition. And now the problem is who's going to be a minister, who's not going to be a minister. Every time there's a new obstacle. Every time there's a new hinder. So I want us all together before this weekend now to stand together in agreement that we need a functioning government here in Israel when Benjamin Netanyahu is the prime minister, and all the plans and whatever he's been working on for the last 2 months of this coronavirus, when he was able to really almost block the amount of dead people here in Israel. They put immediately the blockage and the lockdown here in Israel. So many people were saved thanks to the lockdown, thanks to the fact that we were quarantined on time. And now, when it's really the time to deal with the financial issues here in Israel, to deal with the national budget, we are having another attack, I would say, on the fact that we cannot really have a government. After a year and a half and 3 elections, it's really about time. So let's get together in prayer, in agreement that this is already the time for the government of Israel to be formed, for the ministers to be inaugurated, and for the budgets to be released so we can deal with this crisis and take Israel forward into the next levels when we have to deal not only with the coronavirus, but also with this situation around the borders. The Palestinians are attacking almost every day now. We just lost the soldiers 2 days ago. Yesterday, a Palestinian terrorist came to a hospital and stabbed the guard at the entrance to the hospital. Today, they are just launching all kinds of different stones and rocks on the roads of Israel. They feel that we don't have a government. The enemies are feeling that, and they are creeping closer and closer to us, closer and closer to our borders, and it's enough. We need to have a government that can function, that can face the challenges, that can deal with the terrorism and take responsibility over the economy and the budget. So please, the Lord God of Israel, you are the one who nominates kings. You are the one who puts them in position. We need you to intervene right now, and we need to have a functioning government here in Israel. I hope that next time that I'll be able to report would be when we already have a functioning government and we can really concentrate in how to bring the situation to a better place here in Israel and the challenges that we are facing. I love you a lot, Dubi, and I'll see you soon.